I do think there is always in our society, it doesn't matter whether it's the fires, it's COVID, it's earthquakes, it's volcanoes, all of those things do put scientists and public officials in a very difficult position because they approach the situation from very different constructs. Scientists in general, we're quite comfortable in our own work of not knowing. And knowing things 100% isn't necessary. It's just not possible, and it's not the way the world works. But there are things in science that are absolutely true. We do know those things, and you can put those things together and build a framework for your knowledge and your actions, and trying to make people understand that that's the pathway.
So I really want to hear your reactions to the film, but first I just want to know more about you. I'd love to hear your journey, into geology and seismology, but I'd love to hear, if you feel comfortable. We're a room full of creatives who are obsessed with science and scientists, and so, tell us the version that you might not share in a professional setting, with the juicy bits and the losses and the heartbreak, but also the wins, whatever you feel comfy sharing with us.
So I'm not even clear on the question, but what I will say
Your
is
journey, yes.
We
just wanted to hear about you.
Okay, so my journey. I literally stumbled into geology. I was going to be a chemist. I took chemistry in high school, like many students, and I loved it. It was so interesting. At the same time, I was developing quite a life as a climber and mountaineer, and I went off to college and found, no offense to anybody who's a chemist, I found it was not my thing. Just to put it mildly. It had no creative spark for me at all, and I have many friends that are chemists, and it's good for them, but it was terrible for me. So I also had passed out of a bunch of, courses and had a slot in my schedule, and somebody said, oh, you should take this class called Geology of California. And about 2 weeks into the class, I was like, right, this is a way that I can marry two things I care a lot about, science and my love of the earth and the outdoors, and particularly big mountains. So that was it. I was sunk and have never looked back. It's been a great career, and I think that I'm here possibly because some of my research papers use the word magma in the title. But I was introduced as a volcanologist, and I don't work on volcanoes. I have 40 years of experience in teaching science to people, teaching geology to people who care about a lot of different aspects of it. But my own research is really on the processes that interact in the crust to make magma, to deform magma, to create mountains. That's kind of not a surprise, and how those relate to the motion of plates, tectonic plates on the surface of the earth. And so that is my background. But as a professor at a liberal arts college, I do a lot of talking about science, and I'm rather passionate about scientific interactions with public. So that's also it. I also have to put in a pitch that I am an editor for a journal for the American Geophysical Union, which is it's an international union, which is very engaged in trying to help translate science and the direction for science into policy, as well as they're primarily a scientific institution, but the times have changed, and I'm proud to belong to that.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and we'll get more into that in a moment.
Okay, and I actually have a somewhat similar story. And that when I was little, I liked science fiction books. I liked Isaac Asimov. The movie 2001 was far in the future, and it really was exciting. And I went to college with the idea of physics is basic, and I got problem set after problem set, week after week, and it looked boring. And I took a geology class, and it turned out in geology I could actually do a project as an undergraduate. I could start a whole range of them. I could work on public safety as well as basic science. And so I've gone through a range of jobs. About every 10 years I switch. I taught at UCLA for a decade, ran the Institute for Geophysics and Planetary Physics for a while. I went to the Pacific Northwest for a decade and ran the seismic network. So I actually did was in charge of at least the earthquakes and the volcanoes in the Northwest. And then I come down to USC, where I've been for a decade, and most recently I've actually been working on how the inner core moves and changes over time. So something very esoteric, but I find this whole study of geoscience to be one of the more practical and interesting things that one can study. And it's particularly important, with the current administration, I think, to keep a focus on, why it's important to do science, both practically and intellectually.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned public safety, and we'll get to that because it was so prevalent in the film. I mean, that was juicy-ish, but
We're not very juicy-ish.
I'm just teasing. So turning to the film, though, I mean, what struck me was coming from as a climate storyteller, the uncertainty that we lived in for so long in the film, and everyone was just sitting in the not knowing, in looking for answers and not trusting where they were getting their answers, and that felt so relevant to disasters that we will all continue to face as climate gets worse, and what we faced in the fires, like, is the water safe to drink or not, and searching for answers. So I just felt really moved by that. I felt it was a movie about a volcano, but it felt so relevant. So I'm curious what struck you in that way. Yeah.
Well, the first thing that struck me is how accurate it is. I mean, the ending was not accurate, but until the ending, all the ambiguity of how to interpret it, what's coming next, how do you communicate with the public. I mean, they kind of glossed over the fact that it's just intrinsic. You don't know what's coming, and the movie framed it so that you thought you could see what was coming, or said it was safe sometimes, it wasn't safe other times. So that wasn't so accurate, but they really captured the problem, telling the public what the issues are and what they should do next when they really don't know. Yeah. They can just issue probabilistic statements that the public really can't handle.
Yeah, and I think that is actually, that intrinsic not knowing is what has kept me in science for my whole career. And so scientists in general are driven by that position. I think we're quite comfortable in our own work of not knowing. And as I teach, I can see that's something that it's hard for students to sort of accept. You know how it is. They really want this is right. And I'm like, well, that's, you're not there. We need to keep thinking. Where do we go? And so I thought that they did a good job of portraying those conversations in the movie. I do think there is always in our society, doesn't matter whether it's the fires, it's COVID, it's earthquakes, it's volcanoes, all of those things do put scientists and public officials in a very difficult position because they approach the situation from very different constructs, and they need different answers out of the same situation. And so it is a hard thing. I think public health is another example right now of, over the last half a decade that we can see that difficulty. And I think they did a good job portraying that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's both the issue that it's hard to communicate the risk, but also they don't, sometimes they guess wrong what's going to happen. And then everyone's got a different point of view of what they should be doing, even if they understood it. And actually, there are two cases in the U.S. Volcanoes that have worked out a lot like this. Mount St. Helens had a lot of parallels. They had activity, people evacuated. It turned out it was 6 weeks till the eruption, and it calmed down, and people went back, and they had to push them out. And in fact, there's a whole set of people who are all set to go in the morning that it erupted. If it had erupted a few hours later, they would have been back there trying to pack up more stuff. It could have been even much worse. And the other case is Long Valley. In Long Valley, we had a set of magnitude 6 earthquakes, and when they went to see what happened, the whole caldera had risen, I think it was about a foot. So clearly something had inflated in the caldera, and it was, LA Times broke the story before the scientists, and then it was a holiday weekend, everyone wanted to go up, but then the headline said it's dangerous, and the trouble there is nothing happened for 40 years. So,
it's a long time to wait.
The Chamber of Commerce had to try to quiet things down, and then the scientists, were all flying off the handle. And so there actually are situations much like the movie that have happened.
Yeah, and then the Pinatubo
Pinatubo.
It was a classic.
Well, that was perfect though, because
Yeah, it worked,
the
but it was.
USGS came in like the Lone
It's a classic
Ranger.
to you guys, but maybe not to
Okay.
us, so tell us.
Oh,
Was it 1978? What was it?
yeah,
1978?
yeah, I think it was about 1980.
I don't know.
Hey, the point is, there's a volcano in Indonesia, and it started to act up. And the U.S. was very interested because they had Clark Air Force Base, a huge number of military planes. So they sent the USGS people, U.S. Geological Survey, to monitor the situation. And it just did. It's about the only volcano I know that's done the classic. There were deep earthquakes, and there were shallow earthquakes, and then there was a little bit of smoke, and they evacuated
It worked.
most of the people, and they saved, a lot of lives.
Yeah.
So luckily, it went right according to script.
But it was still pretty tensive, I think, for the scientists.
Yeah,
There was a lot of time when they would, would back off and come forth and back off anyway.
Yeah, but it turned out about as well as it could.
Oh yeah.
My God, there's so many more volcano stories for you all to tell and engage these folks. And I grew up in Portland, so
sure.
Mount St. Helens lore is deep in our
Yeah.
history.
Yeah.
But I guess just to go back to the sitting in uncertainty, that's where I think that we can all, whether we're writing about any kind of disaster, any kind of science where public health is concerned, how would you help? How do you help your students sit in that uncertainty? How do we start? I feel like that is our future. We have to be comfortable with uncertainty. How do you be comfortable with that? If you had any advice on an emotional level, on a more scholarly level, yeah.
I think they were usually less comfortable when they're done listening to me than they are before.
Yeah.
So I'll defer to you.
Well,
No, uncomfortable is good. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I think that I think public education of the education of the public, that we the world is not divided into scientists and non-scientists. And every single person out there is capable of being a scientist. They're not maybe going to have the interest. Like I'm not capable of being a chemist because I didn't like it, and you're a filmmaker because you didn't like a science class. But but to understand the fundamental tenets of how our Earth is built, I mean, both of us have educated scores of people, students, in how the Earth works and the uncertainty of the Earth, and that that knowing things 100% isn't necessary. It's just not possible, and it's not the way the world works. But to know what is true. There are things in science that are absolutely true. We do know those things, and you can put those things together and build a framework for your knowledge and your actions. And trying to make people understand that that's the pathway. And so it does take place, I believe, sort of in almost by the time people get to college, it's almost too late. There is too much emphasis in finding the right answer, filling out the quiz set correctly, and these sorts of things, where we need to be teaching inquiry-based approaches to science, which is why teaching geology is so fun, because that's what we do. And that's what can help people understand, like why we didn't think that COVID was transmitted from the air at first. Why these things? Well, so we change our minds. We learn more. That's what we do. We're not lying. We're saying this is what we knew. Now we know more. We got to keep finding more. We got to act as best we can. And in any of these health and safety things, you've just got to help people understand that, as scary as it is, there's not a person that's going to be able to tell them this. If you do this, this is the right thing. You've got to learn that as a culture that there are true things, and you put them together as best you can. And
and I guess one thing sort of relevant, I guess, to this audience is that the one thing we can do is try to tell them what we do know, and like you're saying, what we don't know. And people are falling short now with the internet with this. I'm researching it myself. And so if they knew, how to look to authority, when to have the appropriate doubts about authority. And, it turns out, as you probably know better than me, it takes an engaging story to get people to pay attention. and listen carefully to understand the situation. So you're probably more
You're the-
useful than me. And
Yeah, exactly.
I talk, and then they hear numbers, and they hear some statistics. You have to engage them and show them how they can verify what you're trying to say, and then they have to get a more complete picture.
But the AI sounds so sure of itself, even when it's lying. So
Yeah.
But it's true that the audience here, you are the perfect people to carry these messages forward to our society, because you reach a far bigger audience than either of us or both of us combined, plus our colleagues that are here with us in the audience. You know, there's just no. You are the people that get listened to. So it's great you're interested in it.
Oh, I love that. That's really moving to hear. And I do wonder, you mentioned, I want to get back to the film for you mentioned the state that we're in, the administration, AI, and and Dr. Google, and what would you say to, I guess, like you're saying, the folks in this room are amazing conveyors of this message. Are there other aspects of the scientific process that you wish storytellers would understand or portray in a film? The collaborative nature, the not knowing, these aspects that we might not normally think about.
That's a hard question. I mean, I think one thing would be, we have a lot of the themes in movies include government corruption. They include scientists have the wrong idea. They include criminals doing something exciting and violent. And real life isn't quite so complicated. I mean, at least it used to be. We'd have expert panels that would define the problem. So it would help if things were accurate, but it's always more exciting though when things are unusual.
Yeah, I mean, most volcano movies are big disaster movies. We're waiting for the very known moment that is going to erupt, and this was a quiet volcano movie, which was really impressive. That it could balance that tone. Are there? What did it get right, and what did it get wrong? You mentioned that there was some moments at the end, so I'm curious.
Well, it took watching it twice to get the story a little better. But most of it was right, except for, in the end, I'm not sure what those bubbling mud cauldrons had to do with much. And then, if there's a lahar, it doesn't quite look like that.
I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, it's a.
I
well,
got
except
it.
it's not
I
a
got it.
lahar.
I thought
It's
it was a
mud.
flag eruption. That's why I was like, they're all done.
It's actually they showed a mudslide, but
Yeah.
they talked about a lahar.
Yeah, I know, but it was his weird.
A
So
lahar
anyway,
has a bunch of hot flaming things, and it has smoke coming off it.
yes,
It's
they're
spectacular.
spectacular.
Can
But
you describe what a lahar is?
A lahar, it's it's like a landslide on the volcano, so it's sliced off a bunch of dirt that has magma in it, and so it throws up tremendous ash and soot as it comes down the hill at about 100 or 200 miles an hour.
it's carrying a lot of gas.
Yeah.
So it's a gaseous sort of.
Yeah, and you don't want to be in the way of a lahar.
No, they're not good. I thought, and I'm surprised you didn't say this, John. I thought they would have been great if they had just mentioned the earthquakes. I mean, they are such a powerful tool. When he says he was in charge of the volcanoes, he was in charge of the seismic network, which is that is one of the biggest tool, it's a huge tool for volcanic eruptions. And so they had pictures which kind of gave that, but they really could have talked about that a little bit more because it's such an important tool.
Well, yeah, just on the topic of how do we tell when a volcano is going to erupt? We basically have three tools. And one is the earthquakes. One is the geodetic observations, like they talked about GPS. You can see some swelling where there's magma coming near the surface. And the third is the gas that you can see coming out as the magma interacts with the groundwater and shoots off some minerals that you can detect. So I thought all those little dots were supposed to be earthquakes, and they don't really look like that.
No, they don't.
But in cartoon form, it was okay.
Yeah, but they didn't talk about them as earthquakes. That's all. I mean, they talked about the gas a lot, and they talked about the tilt and the doming a little bit and stuff. But I wish that they had actually put a plug in for the earthquakes. And what I was going to say, touching back to that, it's just made me think of it. So this is just a plug for if you are interested in almost any aspect of earthquakes or volcanic eruptions or what have you, the USGS maintains a wonderful set of pages which are written for pretty much. You don't need to be a specialist to get the material out, of there, and you can spend forever looking at those pages. So I recommend that as a really important resource. You're paying for it, so you might as well use it.
Yeah.
So you think that the bubbling mud pits at the end was for dramatic effect? For us to, I mean, and I don't think that's not a wrong choice. It's so that we can see, dramatized on screen, maybe an interpretation of what that would actually feel like to be there. But I'm just curious what choices, and maybe there's cut scenes, on the editing floor where they do talk about the earthquake.
And I think it's, maybe a wise choice because, people identify with Yellowstone. Those look like they actually sort of look like something I might cook on the stove, but I think they were probably Yellowstone or Lassen kind of things, and so people understand that's related to volcanoes. So it's not a bad choice. It's just not really. You asked what wasn't really accurate. Yeah, right. That doesn't mean it shouldn't have been used.
And just sort of for perspective, this is modeled after Montserrat. In 1990s, mid 90s, there was a series of eruptions, and what really happened is, the volcano was increasingly active for a year or two, like these volcanoes tend to be, and it was throwing down mudslides in different directions, and it threw down enough, and everyone did evacuate the south end of the island, and they haven't come back. There were enough people that there was one big one in '97 where it killed 20 people, but they had already done an evacuation, and they haven't gone back. So that's what really happened on Montserrat.
And I love the aspect of the film of just tracking her, her motivations for telling people at different moments, but also her desire to, chase the next volcano. And that's kind of if there's a trope of volcanologists, that is it, like, chasing the action. But it also was subtle and really believable in this film, and just curious how that landed with you. If you two would chase the action, or what how you feel about that kind of portrayal of scientists.
I thought that was pretty accurate. I mean, some of the top scientists that really do chase the action, especially the volcano people. They have to go up to Alaska. It's not an easy place to live, but it has the most active volcanoes in the U.S., and they have to travel internationally to connect with their colleagues, and I know a number of volcanologists who do that sort of lifestyle. I mean, I've moved every 10 years to, see Seattle and the Bay Area and Los Angeles, different kinds of earthquakes, different universities. Scientists really gain by going around to see different problems that they can use their skills on.
Yeah, and I think that, you picked up on her curiosity or whatever it seems a little bit, curiosity isn't quite the word, but that's what propels the scientists that I know, and certainly me. I don't do that sort of work, but I have spent much of my career doing remote terrain geology, and it's because that's where the questions are. That's what I want to understand. And do I think it's, I'm not reckless. I've managed to survive, but it's not the game for everybody. It's not, but it is. I think scientists are intensely curious people, and they will do what they need to do to pursue that curiosity and to fulfill it. And I don't think that they're reckless. I know, we all know lots of volcanologists. I don't think they're particularly a reckless breed. But it's a dangerous job, and parts of my job are dangerous, and it just, for those of you that film from helicopters, it's dangerous there too, on the skid. I mean, right? So that's the way it goes. You just.
Well, I know some volcanologists who are like Indiana Jones.
Yeah, well, we know a couple less than we did.
That's true.
Moving on.
True. And,
the juicy bits are coming out.
But as a seismologist, we're just lucky that this is the most dangerous place in the country. So
we're
LA's
so lucky.
Full of seismologists.
Well, on that note, is within your field or your own work, is there something that's underreported or some kind of breakthrough or anything that you've studied or seen that you wish that someone in this room would write a film about? That we should go out and research right away after? Or a scientist or a group of scientists that you think deserve a biopic that no one's made yet? Or, yeah, just leaving this crowd with some inspiration.
Well, I mean,
Nothing.
I mean, most of us are pretty boring. I mean,
You don't sound boring. You're
yeah,
like
I mean, it's a fun field. To work on.
dangerous Indiana Jones.
I mean, there are a
character.
couple of people who really had notable careers. I mean, one across town, Hiro Kanamori, is probably the world's best seismologist. And he was one of the people who argued the Pacific Northwest could have had a big earthquake. He also is one of the people who said Japan maybe should have been worrying about a magnitude 9 like they had 15 years ago. And he's also just the nicest guy. He actually grew up in Japan after World War II. And we were only lucky enough to get him in this country because they went on strike in Japan, the students. And he had to work for a year being driven around in his car because his building was being picketed. He got tired of it after a while. So Caltech got a hold of him. So he's one. And I don't know.
There's a story.
There's a story. Yeah.
And just lastly, as storytellers, we're so inspired by science and scientists. As scientists, have there been stories in your life that have inspired you, either on this path or just, have sunk into you? Either films or fiction or even documentary, anything like that.
Well, my mother was a petrologist, another kind of geologist, and she made me carry rocks up and down the hills. And that's what got me into geophysics, where I don't have to carry rocks.
Well, and you mentioned Asimov earlier, too. So
Yeah,
clearly
science fiction was the power of science. It's just, I like being able to deduce things, and as well as doing things that help society.
Yeah. I think the one I use is, funnily enough, a book called Annapurna by Maurice Herzog, about the first expedition to Annapurna. And I read it when I was 11, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to go do that." So I did. So, so that's one. But just reading everything, I was just a reader. I read pretty much anything that didn't just disappear out of my hands for somebody else. And so yes, Asimov, but also. I read Vonnegut. I read Ursula Le Guin. I just read whatever was around. I think that reading was shaped my entire way of looking at the world. Not so much film. We lived in a family that didn't really go out for that sort of thing. So I didn't watch many movies as a kid. I remember Yellow Submarine. Honestly, that's like it.
Well, thank you so much. It was really inspiring to hear your stories, and this film was amazing. So thank you all. Thank you, Sloan, for having all of us.